Hello, everybody. It's a hangout called Adaptation of Change, I think. I changed it so many times I can't even remember what it's called anymore. But I have with me here a very dear friend and a very known author, speaker, analyst. There's so many things that can go behind David's David Amerland's. We'll just stick to what it says on his lower third there. But everybody knows who he is, so I won't have to reintroduce him. And today, I wanted to have this chat with him about the kind of human factor involving change. And I'll give you a little backstory. By the way, David, welcome. Thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure, absolute pleasure. I've been looking forward to this.
Thank you very much. And so I just wanted to kind of kick some ideas around, see what David's point of view is on those, and I'm sure he'll add his unending wisdom to the conversation. So I myself, for people who don't know, originally came from the former Soviet Union, as you can tell by my accent probably. And the Soviet Union, I won't go into all the boring details about life in Soviet Union, but you have things like everybody's aware of, where you stay in line for 2 hours to get some tomatoes. You don't go to lunch, you actually stay in line outside because tomatoes are being sold outside, because if you don't buy them, then you're gonna be without tomatoes basically, because you can't just go to the store and buy them. That was the reality of life when I was back in the Soviet Union. And so people look at this kind of situation. You stayed how long? They said sometimes 2 hours. And the end result sometimes was actually bad, because they would run out of tomatoes and that's it. You're out of luck basically. And so people over here would ask me, how could you possibly live like that? And so when you look at these kind of things, there were many other examples, but it's that kind of a deal where, yeah, we had to live like that. And when I was a kid, there was no such thing as diapers, and my mom had to adapt to that, and obviously everybody survived. And if you look at back in the hundreds of years ago, you still had the same kind of situation where people constantly had to deal with changes, and they constantly had to adapt, or they wouldn't be able to survive. And obviously we're still, whatever, 7+ billion of us are still here, so people were able to come to adapt and get past all the challenges they had in life, and were able to accomplish what they needed to accomplish. Now, that's not to say that you can adapt to anything and anybody can survive anything, but if you look at some of the people, for example, POWs that came from Vietnam, I'm reading right now a book by Nelson DeMille called Upcountry, which is a phenomenal look back into the Vietnam War, and you read about some of the things that people were able to get past with such a horrific war that was. And then, of course, back to the memories of, that's very dear to me, because if you're from the Soviet Union, you're an expert about World War II. So, all the horror stories from my relatives and in general movies and everything else. And you just wonder, how could people possibly, you look at the siege of Leningrad, where they were, for several years they were completely surrounded by Germans. There was nothing to eat. It's horribly cold. I mean, it's just unbelievable how people survived that, how people survived concentration camps. So they're able to adapt. We're not going to be, by the way, talking about concentration camps today. We're just showing examples how people can be so resilient to adapt to just about anything. And yet, I go to a company and I talk to them about using, for example, Google Plus or Google Apps, which is near and dear to my heart, and it's nothing but a wall in your face about, well, can we use Outlook? No, you can't use Outlook. Why do you want to use Outlook? Well, I've been using Outlook. I like Outlook. Okay, but I'll give you some examples as to how you'll be able to be even more productive and be able to accomplish more things, have more freedom where you access your email. You're integrated with other things in terms of what you'll be able to do. I mean, there's many benefits I can show you that Outlook cannot do. For example, not to mention maintenance and management of having a server when you're trying to collaborate with somebody and things like that on the Windows end. And did I mention it takes me 15 minutes to boot up my Windows PC? Yeah, but I like Outlook. And so this is what David, I wanted to kind of discuss today, is how is it that we have people who are able to get past concentration camps and actually survive and live a life with immense amount of change they had to do to adapt, to be able to live like that. And yet over here you have people, obviously these people were not born using Outlook. They were not born knowing Outlook. So usually we all know, I mean, the question I'm posing is a little bit naive because, certainly, change is something that many people are adverse to because they lose their, I guess, comfort level, and that's why they're adverse to it. But at the same time, we have this tremendous ability to adapt. And some people do see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they adapt almost on the first try, and almost to a point of fault. I mean, you have people sleeping on the streets to get the stupid iPhone 6 that then the next morning is going to be bent in their pocket. So you have that kind of population that's willing to jump on anything, and then at the same time you have people where you go to talk to a business, and they're not dumb people by any stretch. I mean, I'm not talking about iPhone 6 people now. That's a different category. But you're talking about business people who are very astute and savvy in their business, and you bring them the reasons that are both financially sound, in terms of productivity, all these different reasons why switching to something like Google Apps would make a tremendous amount of sense, and yet you still have the wall in your face, and it takes a major effort to go past it. Now, one of the companies I'm talking about is actually a client of mine who I did this last week in Idaho, convert them to Google Apps, convert them to using Chromeboxes instead of their old Windows PCs, and so I'll talk a little bit about that later. But I wanted to ask David, just with this kind of intro, what his thoughts are about, because I know David deals with a lot of large companies. I usually deal with small companies. David deals with large multinationals. Just wondering, what, David, is your take on this problem where people do have ability to change and yet they're so resistant to it most of the time?
Whoa, okay. First of all, although I didn't expect it, I think your introduction where you talked about concentration camps of all things, it's actually brilliant because, yes, people adapted to incredible conditions there, but the reason we adapted in those conditions is because we didn't have a choice. And when we don't have a choice, we adapt to the situation because these are the facts which shape the circumstances which then inform our own actions. And in many ways, the circumstances which we operate in form part of our identity. Identity is what gives us an anchor in the world. So every time we have a sense of change, or every time somebody asks us to do something, we don't hear progress, we don't hear evolution, we don't question is this going to be good or bad and ask for the facts in order to assess it. What we hear is somebody is asking us to change who we are, and we like who we are, which is why we're comfortable within it. And that really is the problem at the heart of any kind of change. It's identity. And identity is constantly informed by the things we do and the way we do them and how we do them. And we like being in a comfort zone. We like operating in spheres which allow us to operate with ease rather than constantly struggle to redefine ourselves and redefine what we do. Change is incredible. It has happened so quickly and it's continuing to happen. I mean, if we think that in 1995 there was no Google, in the year 2000 there was no Facebook, in the year 2005 there was no Twitter. And yet these are now tools which we use constantly, and they're constantly changing, and we have to change with them. But the reason we can change with change when it happens like that is, again, we accept that there's nothing we can do about it, therefore we are invested in that environment. Whereas when we are in a work environment and somebody comes in and asks us to change for whatever reason, that reason doesn't matter. What matters is that we're being forced to make a change we don't want to make. Your question really is, how do you address that? How do you get everybody to change willingly? And really the answer to this one, and it's the same for any scale of business, whether it's a large corporation or large company, and some of the clients I deal with have 34,000 plus employees, or a 2-3 person outfit. It comes down to communication. It comes down to understanding what has changed and why the next step is where they should be going at. If there's no kind of communication which will frame the reasons for change to happen, then what you get is either an active or a passive resistance. Active is probably easier to deal with because somebody says no and you're going to say yes, and then you're going to explain it. They're going to say no, I don't want to hear the explanation. You're going to go back and forth, and eventually they will sort of gradually move to where you want them to move. Passive resistance is probably the worst because people say, yeah, sure, we'll do it, and they don't really buy into what you want them to do. They're not going to follow the systems, they're not going to follow the processes. They're going to sort of go about their own way, and they're going to make mistakes, and the whole thing will come down in shambles, and then they'll say, see, we shouldn't have changed. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So really, in order to avoid both active and passive resistance, you need to frame the question of why the change is happening in the first place. And that becomes then the conversation. It has to be a conversation which starts on why the business is going down that path. Now, no business ever changes willingly because it's costly in terms of real cost, and it's also costly in terms of emotional and psychological effort which is involved in that change. So in order for a business to change, it really has to. Something has changed in either the way the marketplace works or the way the business operates, which has made the traditional way of doing things untenable. And the moment that is actually communicated and everybody can see it, then the next part of the conversation is, okay, if we need to change, how do we manage that change so it's the least painful way of actually progressing forward? It's as easy as possible. And that is a much better way of actually tackling any kind of change, dealing with the teething problems which it will inevitably throw up, and also beginning to foster the mindset that change is part of evolution. Evolution never stops. So really we need to embrace it constantly as part of moving forward. And that's really the best approach which we can take. It means that we use the natural objections brought up, which human nature brings up, unwillingness to do something, and actually make them an ally.
Right. Going back to some of the things that you mentioned, you said something, and I hate to use the concentration camp example, but it works well here. Is some people actually, when you said that there's no choice, some people did choose to end their own lives because they just couldn't take it anymore. So there's always some choice. It's just not a great choice, but there is always some choice. And in case if you're looking at let's brighten up a little bit the mood here. If you look at the situation with, for example, companies changing, then I think the important thing to look into is who you're talking to make this change occur. So I think it's definitely, I'm in total agreement that the communication needs to take place. It's a must. But who do you communicate with? Because it seems to me that if you don't deal with the influencers in the company, people who actually sign the checks and put their foot down, then you most likely are going to have a hard time accomplishing anything because they have the final word. At the same time, if the people, troops on the ground, so to speak, or the regular folks in the company do not adapt the changes that are being introduced, then like you said, it's all going to fall apart, maybe not immediately, but soon, because they're just not interested in doing it. So it has to be a communication with both parts, both the management and the regular employees, to be able to really effectively make it a successful transition. Do you agree with that estimate?
I think you made a very important point here. I mentioned that when we are being asked to change as individuals, what is really affected is our identity, because this is invested in the way we operate, in the way we do things, and how we do them. So that is the thing that it gets challenged and then needs to be addressed so we can evolve. Funnily enough, this is exactly how companies are also like individuals. When you ask a company to change, what you're really asking it to do is to partially redefine and rework its identity. And identity is a funny thing. It's a collaborative collaborative construction or a construct which is made up of culture and belief systems and values and way of operation and everything which goes in to make a company or to make a person. So really, if you don't get the company and to understand that this is part of its identity which is evolving, which means that management is on your side because they understand the imperatives. The people who are the influencers on the ground, the team leaders perhaps, or the IT department, they are on your side because they understand the imperatives. And obviously the people who are being affected the most, what we call the people on the ground, whether it's a sales force or the people dealing with customers or the people who have to action most of the work, they also have to understand. And if you can't get all those people to become part of the conversation so that they can understand what's happening, then what you're getting, which I've seen on a few occasions, is a company which is at war with itself. One part of it is trying to change, the other part of it isn't. So basically it's resisting. So you have a lot of internal fighting, you have a lot of passive aggressive resistance where things are don't get done, and then somebody is to blame, and then you have to go around trying to find out who's to blame and what can be done to sort it out. And there's a lot of effort and pain involved in this kind of process, which doesn't really benefit the company at all. And this is why it's so important to get the conversation going in as clear a way as possible, to get communication right across the board, because then everybody can see everybody's efforts, they can understand why these things are happening, they can have an opinion and make their voice heard, because everybody resists change, ourselves included. When something changes in Google Plus, for instance, we go, oh, not again. Really, I mean, what we sort of feel is that suddenly something has changed which we knew how to work, and now we need to go back and learn exactly why and how it has affected us and what we can rework in the way we operate, and we resist that. So it's a natural reaction, but the moment you have a conversation going through, then you realize that, hey, this is where we're going, it's going to be better in many ways, and yes, it's going to be a laborious process in order for us to get there, but if we all pull together, it becomes a lot less painful and a lot more beneficial, and it'll get us there faster. And that's the way that good companies, or companies which are aware of the issues, transition themselves successfully to where they need to be.
Well, I'm going to differ with you just a tiny bit here. For the record, this is one time in 100 million when I actually differ with David's opinion. But the reality is, I think, that I understand from your standpoint that if somebody comes out with big changes to Hangouts, it's on a professional level, it could be detrimental because you have this book out, everybody is buying your book, and now your book is not exactly up to date. So I can understand the angst against Google for that. I mean, I totally buy that. But if you really look down deep inside, David, tell me if I'm wrong, every time I see the G Plus update on mobile, I can't jump fast enough to the Play Store to be able to download it. Do you not do the same thing?
Oh, absolutely, I do that.
That's what I mean. So that when they make changes, in other words, it's not that we are adverse to them. We just, at least I know myself, I'm always, not to say that I always 100% agree with whatever changes Google makes, but most of the time when they do come up with upgrade, I'm eagerly looking for the upgrade to see what new things they've done, what they've changed, and everything. But I'm an IT guy who has absolutely zero adversity to change when it comes to IT-related things. I love all this stuff. I've been living it for the past 30-some years, and I absolutely adore all this stuff. So I'm a little different than most people in that regard. But I think, for a lot of people, you can see the wave of posts and cross posts and reposts and everything else on Google Plus. Whenever the updates come out, you can see that a lot of people on Google Plus, I mean, they basically immediately jump on it whenever there's new changes, even though you still have a lot of people, complaining afterwards about, they don't like this, they don't like this. But for the most part, I think people are, at least people who are on Google Plus, they seem to be very receptive to, they're eager to get the new changes, whatever even though they don't know what these changes are. So with that being the case, then the question becomes in the company, when you're looking about on the company level, when the changes do come in, I guess the thing I wanted to ask is, Yifat, I guess, is sitting at the holiday dinner. She says that she won't be able to come in because they're doing the New Year. So I officially will say Happy New Year to Yifat and the family, and I guess she'll have to join us some other time. So what I wanted to say was that, and she totally threw me off my deal now. See, tiny little thing can change you immediately. And I guess that brings me back to the point of Soviet Union. This explains what we talked about, why they had KGB. Because there was an organization that made sure that whatever changes the government wants to impose are taken exactly the way it's supposed to be taken according to the government. It doesn't matter what people think. And even though it's a joke, at the same time I want to be serious and say, do you think there is any way or any means to create not a company, not a department that breaks legs or anything like that, but somebody who has influence, and maybe that's the IT department, who makes this change be more uh, fluid and constant and consistent and positive influence on the people in the company. Because like you said, you're always going to have people who are for something, against something. No way you're going to please everybody 100% of the time. It's just physically impossible. So when you're talking about a small mom and pop shop, then it's much easier because you only really need to convince mom, and pop will go along. But if you're talking about a company that has, like the company I used to work for many years here in Bellevue, Washington, was a timeshare company called Vacation International. They had 100 employees. So even though it's considered a small company, it was always a nightmare trying to incorporate some kind of changes in the company, even though we had our own IT department, and I was one of the let's say, actively spoke. What's the right word to use? Definitely outspoken person in terms of making changes and making improvements, things like that. But it was definitely, it was definitely a tough deal. One of the things I did back then, the web was very new then. I figured out how we can take our legacy system and take the data about availability at our resorts. They have like 20-some resorts across the western U.S., and show it to people on the website so they can see, so they can plan better. Because otherwise, you just pick up the phone, you call, I'd like to come to Maui on May 20th. Well, we don't have any availability. Okay, so now I got to go talk to my wife. I got to go talk to my boss. It's a nightmare trying to plan like this. But when you can actually look at availability online, it was, it was just, a lot of people just said it's the best thing the company has ever done. And in that particular instant, just to bring that one example to the table here, when I went to talk to my boss to say, can we implement this thing? Can we go ahead forward and get it done? Because I know how to do it. It's not going to take that long. The answer was no, even from my IT boss. So then she said, why don't you go talk to the CEO of the company at the time, see if he wants to do it, because I kept pushing, saying, this is going to be a great thing. And I went to talk to the CEO, so at least I was happy that she'd let me talk to the CEO on the subject. The guy says, no, we have so many things going on. We have all these initiatives, everything is going on. And I'm trying to explain, do you understand what kind of value you're bringing to your customers by implementing that kind of feature, which, by the way, at the time was unavailable in any other company, anywhere in the States or worldwide, as far as I know. Nobody had this yet. And I'm bringing it to them on the platter, and the answer is no. They're not doing it. So finally, the way it got addressed is I finally told him, because I've known him for many years. He was basically not just CEO, but he also was a friend, still is till this day. I said, look, I'm going to come in on the weekend on my own time. You don't have to pay a dime for this, and I want to get this done. Just give me a yes so I can actually get it done. You don't have to pay me anything for it. Well, no, I don't know if we can do that. I don't want you to work. I said, look, I want to do it. It's my, whether I work for free or not is my prerogative. Just give me an okay to go ahead and get it done. And so within, I don't know, basically it took me 1 weekend to get it done. And then about, 3-4 weeks later, we got an email from one of the customers that said this is the best thing VI has done in the 20 years they've been in business. Amazed me to read that kind of email, but it shows you how short-sighted a lot of management people may be. And this is definitely a smart guy. I've known him for many years, very astute guy. And so these are the kind of challenges you wind up facing, and in this particular case, I was able to overcome it, and it had a positive response, a positive result, I should say. But talking about this kind of a deal here, in other words, how do you get, or do you get somebody like KGB to become part of the company to be able to get changes through and have a fairly fluid and pain-free transitions going forward as the business evolves?
Okay. First of all, I'm laughing a little bit because of the example you said, because it resonates a lot with my own experience. I was hired very specifically back in 1995 to be communications director for a blue chip UK company. And part of my job was to help them transition into the 21st century. And everything I suggested was always shut down because it wasn't the company way. And nobody could tell me what the company way was. So the way I moved forward is the way you moved forward, and the way it always happens. When the existing system resists you, and the existing system will always resist you, you find ways to subvert it. I mean, you created alliances and you got somebody to agree to you coming in and doing it for free. So you bent the system and you did it. And the way I did it, I created very strategic alliances and got people to make incremental changes, which then became the platform for bigger changes. The reality is that you will never have an advocate in a company which will be absolute and everybody will follow, simply because the moment that happens, the responsibility for change becomes that exclusive department's responsibility alone, and everybody else steps away from it. So suddenly, you're fighting the entire company because you have an ally who says things must be done this way, and they won't. So how do you fight that, or how do you bend that?
Well, there was
Well,
no KGB, right?
no, absolutely not. So then that leads us to the question, what do you do? Well, what you do is you try to find a way to bend the system and then prove the worth of the change. Pretty much the way you did it when you were working in a company, pretty much the way I did it when I was in a corporate world. So really, you need to have always proof of concept. And we must understand here, why does resistance happen in the first place? It doesn't happen because the people in charge are stupid. They're not. But it happens because they are risk adverse. And they're risk adverse because that's their job. They are there to take decisions which will move the company forward and will not expose it to any kind of harm. And normally, when you suggest any kind of change, change is unknown because you don't really know what the effect will be. It's new, it's untested, it's untried. Yes, you can hope that it will have a specific effect, but it doesn't, or it's not always something which is guaranteed. So as a result of that, there's a high risk factor, even if it's a perceptual one, always associated with change. That's why you get a kind of resistance. And it's natural, it's perfectly natural. This is what the company's DNA is supposed to do. So really, then you need to come in with proof of concept. You need to say, okay, this is what in theory we're going to get. This is how we're going to test that theory. We're going to do this and we're going to get that. And if that works, then we'll have learned a valuable lesson from this part of the company, which we can apply to the entire company. And if you do that, then suddenly you get a lot less resistance because it's demonstrated benefit. You get a lot less pain in the transition process, and you get more people rooting for you rather than against you. And all of this is very energy consumptive from your point of view, because you need to communicate with so many different people. You need to perhaps take 20 steps instead of 5. The outcome is that you will get people moving a lot faster in a corporate world towards where they need to be in order to survive.
Okay, so let's take a question. Cheryl Deuce was asking a question. Do you think people hang on to their knowledge base proficiency as a way of being seen as a valuable employee, and when you give them something new to learn, then their foundation isn't as solid?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the moment you give them something new to learn, what do you actually give them? You don't give them the potential to prove themselves in a fresh way. You're basically undermining their existing value, undermining the sense of assurance in who they are, their sense of identity, and you're giving them the possibility of failing because they don't know if they will actually be able to perform in a new environment or with new parameters.
I think one of the key things from my experience is that being consistent, and actually the better word is not consistent but persistent, is very important when you're trying to implement changes. In this particular example I'm going to cite is this last trip to Idaho, and the example there is, without going through all the gory details, the resort lost their resort manager. This is the person that I worked with for many years already. I think she worked there for like 9 years. And we talked about doing the Google Apps transition. I talked about to the CEO of the company. She was fairly computer savvy. I mean, she uses computers, she knows computers, she's good. Good user is what I'm trying to say. And I explained the reasons why it's so important to switch to using Google Apps specifically for our organization. I happen to be their consultant, but also their IT director and kind of CTO, so I kind of wear many hats in the company. And in this particular case, even though things were talked about, and people, like David mentioned earlier, were agreeing to some degree. She was agreeing. At the same time, there was always something. Give us 3 weeks until the season becomes low season, so we can have a little bit more time. We need another couple of weeks until the carpets get cleaned, and we get past that. I mean, on and on and on for years, for several years, it's been going on because I've been harping on it and harping on it. And let's just wait till October. Well, we're in May now, so you realize how long it's going to take. Yeah, but we got to do this and we got to do that, and so it was one of these situations where I was in a position where, even though the CEO of the company has a lot of trust and definitely listens to my opinion on anything IT related, and vast majority of the time acts on it as I request, at the same time he needs to be sensitive, and he is sensitive to what his next level lieutenants, so to speak, have to say on the subject. So he can't just say, well, Oleg says we should switch to Google Apps, so I don't really care about what you say, switch to Google Apps. It doesn't work like this. He's trying to be an excellent leader, which he is, and at the same time it winds up being where he's not really knocking me or trying to have me change my opinion about the whole thing, and he's not telling me we're not doing it, but at the same time we're not doing it. So it winds up taking an amazing amount of time. And so the end of the story is very simple. The company hires a new manager who has a degree in computer science, and I started literally jumping up and down without anybody seeing things. Thank God, finally we got somebody who will understand what I'm talking about and be able to to make these changes. And this is already after the CEO did say that we're going to be switching very shortly to Google Apps anyway, regardless of everything else going on. But of course now we have to delay because we got the new manager aboard, so on and so forth. The manager did not work out, to make a long story short, fairly quickly, and a person stepped in whom I've known for many years, who is actually accounting expert, and she's been CFO of the company for a long time, so she stepped in to kind of fill the shoes temporarily, potentially permanently. Luckily she accepted it, and it was the best thing that could have happened to this company, in my opinion, ever, literally, since 14 years ago when it was started, because she's so understanding and she's so easy to talk to in terms of she's smart and she's capable. And so even though she doesn't know any of the things I'm talking about, specifically with Chrome boxes and Google Apps and remote desktops and things like that, she understands enough to be able to listen to what I have to say in terms of the reasons why it makes sense, and then act on it as the manager, basically, to make it happen, even with some people who are resisting change. And so I think the point I wanted to make was that it is important to have the proper change occur. I mean, you need to bring in the changes that are valid for many reasons, and you need to be able to back up why you're trying to change a company. But also it needs to be a persistent effort, because just because it doesn't happen immediately, it's certainly something that can and will, very good possibility, happen over time because of these other circumstances that may be changing. I'm sure it's not the only company that has these kind of transitions occurring, where you have people coming and going, and then the whole shift winds up happening, and literally after several years of constantly talking about changing to adapt Google Apps and to switch to use Chromebooks and Chromeboxes, and to switch the whole mindset of how things are done internally on a day-to-day basis using some of these applications and using tablets, things like that, which is something they've never done before. Within 4 days, this transition occurred, and now we're actually going forward and getting everybody trained and getting everybody on board with doing it. And so far, because of her leadership and her willingness to adapt this particular change, not only did we make it happen, but now I'm not getting the pushback I used to get from a bunch of people. We're actually talking about how to get these things implemented better, as opposed to let's not implement them. Do you have any thoughts on that, David?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole thing you described really is change management, and what the situation you were in before was a lack of any kind of process for change management. In order for change to work, you need 4 basic principles. First of all, you need a very clear reason for change and a clear direction to go towards. The second thing you need is a specific timeline. It's not enough to say we need to change. You need to put specific timeline and milestones according to which things need to happen, which then will demonstrate the company is changing. The third thing which you need is a change champion, because yes, you're pushing for change, but if you don't have an internal change champion to also amplify your message and get everybody going, all you're going to be met with are either resistance lines or stony glances, as nobody really wants to respond to change. And the final ingredient which you need is demonstrable proof of benefits from the change. And then that becomes the iteration that allows everybody else to get on board and ask how they can change better. Because the moment things improve, there's a status enhancement feature attached to it. Everybody wants the new shiny thing because it's clever, it's progressive, and they want to have it. And then everybody, for them, change can't happen fast enough. If you don't have those four elements in your change management structure, then you don't have a change management structure in the first place. So telling people they need to change and explaining why is not good enough, because they'll say, yeah, we get it. And then they will bring up all the ordinary, natural, and very understandable reasons why they can't do it just yet. And that's their way of saying that, they're putting off psychologically and subconsciously the pain and the uncertainty of any kind of change by acknowledging it has to happen, but they're not quite ready for it. So yes, I mean, this is what happened to you, and you sort of sorted it organically by actually putting a change management process in place.
Okay, so we talked about some gruesome things before. Let's continue on that subject. When I was working in the corporate world, we had this theory of getting hit by bus, and so that's what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that here. Is that a lot of the things that I did, and I still continue to do, people always have a concern about, you know all this stuff, but what if you did get hit by a bus? And so
Yes.
how do you, to ask you specifically, how do you deal with that? Because a lot of times the champion of the change is a single potential entity. Like in my case, it's me. In your case, it's you. It's not like a team of people necessarily. It's just you coming in to make...
What I'm going to clarify here, that we are change agents,
Right.
but we're not the champions of change. You always need an internal champion, somebody who will root for you because they understand what you do, they get it, and they're on your side within the company. And then the moment you have that, you also have the initial impetus necessary to begin training them. Essentially, what you will need to do is do away with part of your job, if not completely all of your job. So you need to empower them. And that's when they will actually feel that the change that is happening is something which they own as compared to something which is imposed upon them by circumstances and outside influences. If they own it, they are willing to go with it. If they feel it's imposed upon them, they resist at every step of the way, even though they may be paying lip service to it. And these are important conceptual differences to actually have in mind, and it's important in the way you approach any kind of change in an organization. You can't go there and say, hey, I know why you're failing, you need to change, this is what you need to do. They'll say, yeah, we'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
This is what happens.
Right.
Tomorrow never comes.
So basically, in other words, to describe what David said is that if you look at the Star Wars analogy, it'll be like having a Sith apprentice. In other words, you come into the company as the main guy, but you have to have an apprentice to be able to actually make things happen, right?
Yes, absolutely. You do need that Sith apprentice to get things done and be your spokesperson when you're not there.
Right.
Exactly.
And hopefully you're a Jedi, not a Sith. But
yes.
So going back again to the hit by bus theory, then let's say that something, God forbid, does happen to the either the champion or the agent, doesn't really matter. In both cases, it winds up being a situation where you potentially, as a management personnel or staff, become in a tough spot because you might be partway into the transition, or you're just starting the transition, potentially a big one, and now all of a sudden you're stuck with the situation where you don't know how to proceed. The person who was bringing the whole focus and the vision of where things are going to be going is no longer available for whatever reason. How, as a company, in your opinion, how should a company react to it, and how should you, as the person bringing it to the company, address this particular concern?
Well, again, this is first of all, from a company perspective, this is risk management. No company wants to put its entire transition effect into the hands of one person. And this is also part of the change process. If you set up the change process properly, then you have actually specified very in a great detail the plan of where it's going, all the different staging points, the milestones, and how each one of these is going to be achieved. So then that means that if the company loses you, for instance, tomorrow for whatever reason, they still have enough of a plan and enough of an idea to know where they're going, and it's just a case of replacing somebody like you. And people like you and me, we're not unique in what we do, so we're easily replaceable.
That's debatable. Go ahead.
Well, maybe. Well, we'd like to think otherwise, but I think at the end of the day, somebody else can do the job, equally well. And that's the approach which basically creates a confidence for the company to move forward. And that means sharing. Again, communication is key. You need to share the vision of where they're going, the details, steps will take them there, the implementation, how long it will take, what will actually involve every step of the way. And your internal champion has to be part of this. And part of his job is to basically communicate with everybody else around him in order for everybody to be aware of what is actually happening. So, should anything happen to either of you, there should be no problem.
Yeah, well, let's back up a little bit on that, because there's a lot of companies that are small companies. David is used to running with these companies that are basically like country size equivalent, and so he's dealing with massive number of people. By the way, the only reason North Korea is so screwed up is because they never hired David to take care of that, to tell him what to do. So just for the record, I just wanted to bring it up. But seriously, David, going back for a second, a lot of companies are small companies where you have 5 employees, 10 employees. You really don't have the flexibility or resources to be able to have a full-blown plan, not only going in, but at the same time, have a risk management capability in place, because you just don't have the resources to be able to do that much planning. And so I realize that you normally deal with big companies, but if we bring it down to the entrepreneur level, where you have a company of 10, maybe 20 employees, how would you address it in that case?
Well, okay, you have 10 to 20 people, and they are incredibly busy, very, very stressed, and they look to you to provide a solution. Then part of the solution which you provide is the assurance that basically they're not trusting you blindly. So yes, perhaps there's no internal change champion that you can go to, but as part of your job, you should actually create a blueprint for them, where you can say, hey guys, on day 1 we do this, and on day 5 we do this, and these are the steps required, and on day 20 this is what it is. And even if you slip on that timeline, at least everybody can see exactly where you are in the progressive timeline that you've actually drawn up.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a great way to do it. You basically need to come up with a plan,
yeah.
And I think it's an excellent, absolutely the best way. I think I was going to put you a little bit in a hot seat and say, if you were a small company and somebody came to you with particular ideas of change, then but you already addressed it. Basically, if somebody comes into you with the proper plan in place, then you have much less risk. If a plan makes sense to you, then you should be able to implement that plan with that person or just about any other person astute in that particular area. And as David said, we're both not replaceable necessarily, but certainly expandable, or vice versa, however you want to look at it. And so there's definitely other people involved when you're talking about dealing with hardware and software and just business consulting, business intelligence. Definitely people out there to do it. Yeah, what I do, since I design systems for businesses and develop them afterwards and then support them, you do exactly that. I come to them saying, all you're paying for initially is the plan, the blueprint. I get that done. It takes X amount of time, X amount of money, and then at the end you decide, do you want me to continue and actually develop it for you, or do you want to take it to somebody else? The end result is you don't lose. You spend some money, but that money is for the blueprint, which you can use with anybody you wish in the future. You have now something substantial and credible to be able to move forward should you decide to do it. At the same time, the risk is fairly minimal, because you're not paying for the entire system just to find out that it's not something for you, because you can know ahead of time, look at the blueprint, see if it makes sense to you, And if you want somebody else to implement it, you just pay them to do it. But so it winds up being a much more cohesive environment for them to be able to have this blueprint, as you stated, and then it eliminates the hit by bust thing relatively well that way. So yeah, I
Exactly.
totally agree.
That's the elimination of risk and uncertainty every step of the way, and it's really good communication. If you actually communicate that so well, then you help them establish trust in what you're doing. You have greater faith in their ability to do what you want them to do, and it makes for a better relationship.
So I think if we were to summarize it, the basically number one point would be you need to obviously be on the ball yourself when you're bringing any kind of change. You know what you're talking about. So you're not coming in saying you're great, and then Amon Jones puts an article about you totally decimating you because you screwed up so
Yes,
badly. So
yes. Well,
for
you
people who
should not
don't
be
know,
learning. You should not be learning on the job. That's for sure.
people who don't know what I'm talking about, you can look at David's stream or Amon Jones' stream, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So number one, you do need to know what you're talking about. Number two, you need to be clear and well, you need to be creative, but mostly it's about being clear and being able to explain exactly what the change will involve to the proper people in the company, most likely starting with people who are who will have the final word about implementation, yes or no. So you have to convince them, and then potentially if they give you an opportunity to convince people below them, then you can certainly bring the message to them as well if you're given permission to do so, because they're going to be, a lot of them potentially are going to be your agents of change if they buy into your message, even though the top of the people in the company may be a little bit on the fence, potentially talking to them about this change. Then you're definitely going to have a leg up if you're able to communicate with everybody and swam in the direction of change. When I say swam, I don't mean you want to be influencing people because you read some books by Tony Robbins, but influencing people because what you're trying to present to them makes sense from their standpoint. You know, if you read any books about sales, they'll tell you that the best radio station for everybody is WIFM, which is how business people look at you whenever you're selling something to them, which stands for what's in it for me. They don't really care about the change. They don't really care about the technology. They don't care about anything. All they really care about is how is it going to improve what they're doing right now, how is it going to make them, allow them to make more money, allow them to be more efficient and effective. That's all they really care about. Nothing personal. I mean, I don't think people should ever take it personally, but the bottom line is that's what people are looking at. That's what they're looking for. Something that'll improve what they currently have, and that should be the main communication points in terms of that. So once you do that, then I think the next step is to be consistent and persistent. You need to continue to bring the message. If the message is not being accepted immediately in the direction that you want to continue to push this message, obviously within reason and obviously with the proper amount of politics and everything else in place. I mean, you need to know how to play the game, but at the same time, you need to continue to be bringing this message to the table and bringing more and more positive reasons why you think they should be making that change, provided, of course, you want to continue to pursue the subject with them. I mean, one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to be hitting the steel wall with your head and think that at some point in time you're going to break the steel wall. You're just not. It's not happening. So if you see yourself, you know, it's what David was saying earlier about kind of people being on the threshold of pain. It's one of the things that I learned from one of the, you know, speaking of Tony Robbins, one of his books. It says people usually gravitate towards something that's good for them, and they want to avoid as much as possible pain. So those are the two main motivators and reasons why people do anything. It's either to gain pleasure or to avoid pain. There's nothing else there. You know, a lot of people talk about, you know, gray matter, not gray matter, but gray area, blah, blah, blah. It's nothing. It really is those two things. Either they want something because they think it will give them pleasure, or they don't want something because they think it will give them pain. So the idea is either bring your reasons to show enough pleasure, if you will, for them that they'll decide to go ahead and move forward with it, or you need to show them how much pain they're going to endure, and you need to actually, make them understand how much pain they will endure if they do not go ahead with these changes. And when I say pain, I don't mean physical pain. I mean things like, your competition basically will eat you alive within 2 years if you don't do this. And of course, you have to show it and prove it. You can't just say that, because obviously they know you're trying to do something that obviously is good for you, because otherwise you wouldn't be talking to them. So all of these things kind of play into it. A lot of these things are a little naive. A lot of these things are totally understandable by just about everybody. But the bottom line, if you put all the sugarcoating and everything aside, those are the reasons. You put on the table things, what they will gain if they do it, and what they will potentially lose if they don't, and then you let them make the decision. And so if you're persistent, and if you're have a good story, and or a good game plan, I should say, not a good story, and obviously you need to be completely credible on the subject. You don't just come to a business saying you're going to do ABC for them, and then when they tell you yes, you totally fall on your face. I mean, that only works once, and then you never recover. So all of these things play, especially in today's world of semantic search, right, David? Where anybody can write articles like
exactly.
John's just did. And so, so credibility is definitely important factor there. But then, if you do this, I think using those steps, those elements. I'm sorry I don't have a presentation today, so you just have to kind of keep in mind. I think you'll be fairly successful in being able to introduce and bring the change to the table. But like I said, you always need to keep in mind that steel wall, that if you keep pushing and you're being persistent, you need to kind of know at which point you're going to quit if you just do not see any give at all to move in the direction you're trying to move, because then you're just wasting your time. You're really wasting their time as well, because they're set on not doing it, and that's the end of the story. And so, David, feel free to add whatever you want to add to that.
I was going to say, it's the old thing, isn't it, where you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. The only way to work, really, is in a cooperative fashion. You need to align your goals with the company goals, and they need to understand that you've done that. And again, it comes down to that communication of values and communication of ideas. If you are able to become their true ally, then there is no reason for them to fight you when you suggest change. If they understand why they need to change, and you have been able to communicate that well, then again the question is, how quickly can we do it? How can we make it as easy as possible and not painful at all? And these are the ways of achieving success in this kind of thing. I will say that in the 21st century, change means that we need to develop the kind of mindset which allows us to accept it, because we will not be able to avoid it, and then find ways to make it work for us and find ways to make it happen as quickly as possible. And I think the example you gave earlier, if you get the Google Plus update, you quickly go to your phone to get to download it. Well, you and I understand immediately that, first of all, we have no choice, it's happened, and secondly, it's whatever it is, good or bad, we're going to work with it because it's going to be something new, and that's exciting. A lot of people aren't like that because they don't understand what the choices are. So then they resist it, and they fight it, and they scream, and they say, Google, bring the old interface back. Google, what are you doing? And eventually they'll accept it. But, they go through that painful process for them. But that's because the mindset isn't there. And today's companies really need to have that kind of mindset, which I think is a 21st century mindset, in place and in play, because it allows them to become more competitive.
Yeah, I think it's to some degree it's kind of like children. If you look at children, how they, you got to eat this kasha or something, and the immediate reaction is, no, I don't want this. I want some candy instead. It's like almost people don't grow up. Is they're used to eating.
We don't. You're quite right. You're absolutely right.
So they just don't seem to grow up to, and it's what it is. If any business people listen, the main thing I'd recommend, at least from my experience and the way I try to look at things, is be open-minded. You don't have to agree with anybody, or most people anyway. If you don't want to, it's up to you. Obviously, you have the choice. I again differ a little bit with David. He says there is no choice. There is a choice. You don't have to update the Google Plus if you don't want to. You can roll back the updates if you want to. I mean, you cannot uninstall it completely, but you can certainly roll back the updates if you wanted to. But that's not the point. The point here is that if you're open-minded to at least look at things. I mean, yes, you know things are going to be different. That doesn't mean they're going to be worse or they're going to be bad. They could be. I mean, there's always a chance of that. But at the same time, they don't have to be necessarily. So until you look at it and actually try it and see, you won't know. It just, you know, it's the same thing. It's the complete opposite reaction of the old, you know, ice sheep, as they call them. You know, people who sleep on the street for 2 weeks just to get a stupid phone that's going to bend in their pocket, you know, and then they'll have to throw it away or try to get it fixed. It's the same kind of opposite of that mentality is you do not jump into things without thinking. You do not jump into things without knowing. Nothing, you know, don't just go for a change because the change is there. I mean, that's the wrong reaction. Be open-minded to look at things, consider them, think about them, and then decide whether it's something for you or whether it's not for you. And of course, you also have referrals. You have the whole thing with, you know, semantic search in terms of when you look for things and you look to see what other people have done. You look for like-minded people. You look for, you know, correlation between different things. And you know, if you don't have David's book on semantic search, you should just click stop on the Hangout right now and go to your browser and pull up Amazon.com. Or better yet, I think they can go directly from you, right, David? So go to davidamerland.com and just buy the book. You can also buy a book on Hangouts. Then you learn how to do Hangouts better than I'm doing. And also the reasons why for business it's a absolutely amazing must tool to use in many ways. I mean, so there's another book from David. So you got semantic search covered, Hangouts covered, and I hear that David is working on a new book now. And of course, you know, like I talked about KGB, if anybody says anything about this new book, they get immediately visited by the ex-KGB people. So nobody's talking about that. But David is working on a new book. David, I hope it's okay that at least I said that you're working on a book.
Absolutely.
I think you mentioned it somewhere else before. So you can look forward to another new book coming out from David sometime. When, David?
It's going to be, at the moment, it's March next year. It's a publication.
March next year. So 2015. It's not that far away. Trust me, you've been waiting for all these Star Wars episodes to come out, and now you've seen all of them. And so, you know, it's doable, in other words. It's again, that kind of change where you're thinking, oh my God, the next Star Wars is not going to be out till... And then, of course, time comes and you see it and everything is cool. And then you can badmouth, you know, Disney this time about them doing a horrible job. But David's books are all great, and, you know, it will come out at that point. And so you can definitely check it out. Always can go to davidamerland.com. That's the best place to go for everybody, right, David, for everything related to you?
Yeah, for updates, yeah. I usually update the stream. Or, you know, just look me up on Google+.
Oh, and of course, yes, Google+. So you go to Google+, and you know how to do that. If you don't, you can ask me, because that's what I do for a living. Anyway, David, I wanted to finish this by thanking you tremendously. Interesting conversation. Certainly, I think for anybody who's in business, it'll give them a little bit of food for thought, so to speak. And if you want to conclude anything in the end before we finish, by all means.
Oh, I was going to say, you know, everything you covered is incredibly important. It's part of this 21st century way of working. It's more transparent, it's more open, it's more communication driven, it's more value alignment orientated, and that's the way to move forward.
Yes, great. Thank you, David, as always.
Thank you.
And we'll talk again some other time.
Definitely.
Take care.
You too.